England has historically been one of the most centralised countries in the world. This means the national government in Westminster makes the rules and local councils implement them, with little ability to tailor them to the needs of the region they're in. But there's change afoot, and it goes by the name of devolution. Devolution is supposed to bring neglected regions more power, more money, and more influence closer to the people on the ground who really need it. It's being marketed as a solution to England's economic decline and also to quell anti-Westminster sentiment. To much of the public, understandably, devolution sounds just like another political wonk buzzword. But it really matters. If all devolution deals currently pending are implemented by 2025, then the majority of England will be covered by a devolution deal. We want to change the understanding of devolution over the next few episodes of this mini-series by exploring what devolution actually is, its potentials and pitfalls, and find out, if devolution is an opportunity, who are the people currently taking it? We've started our journey here in the northeast of England, a region that really wears the last 20 years on its face. Deindustrialisation, Brexit and austerity have really done a number on the northeast. It has the highest rates of child poverty in England and unemployment rates well above the national average. We're beginning here because in 2004, the northeast voted no in a devolution referendum that would have introduced a regional assembly like the one Greater London has. The defeat led to New Labour abandoning similar devolution plans across England. But 20 years later, the northeast is now fragmented and devolved via the Conservative iteration of devolution. And on the 2nd of May, 2024, voters will go to the polls to elect the first ever Northeast Mayor, who will head up a brand new Northeast Combined Mayoral Authority. To understand how the Northeast has gone from a regional no to a geographically fractured yes on the question of devolution, my first stop is Newcastle University to speak to Louise Kempton, Professor of Urban and Regional Policy.
By devolution, we would really say it needs to involve real autonomy over policy making, an elected government and fiscal responsibilities. And anything less than that is more, I would say, delegation than devolution. So we would prefer to use the term decentralisation because I feel at the moment that's what we're talking about here, decentralising certain resources and powers over certain policy areas, but that is not devolution. We've seen various forms of decentralisation over the years, so we would talk about a sort of a pendulum swing that kind of moves between localism to regionalism, back to centralism, back to localism. And it's, every 10 years we seem to see a shift in that pendulum. And meanwhile, we've lost kind of 10, 15 years while one thing was being dismantled, something else was being built in its place. And this institutional churn is actually really, really damaging because it takes an awful long time to kind of rebuild those networks, trust, and really kind of start delivering, So one thing we would really plead for is please don't change this now in 10 years' time. Let's stick with what we've got.
When I was elected, Theresa May was Prime Minister. I've had 4 Prime Ministers, 6 Chancellors, Brexit, COVID, energy price hikes. It's been a turbulent time.
This is Jamie Driscoll, the current Mayor for the North of Tyne. He's standing to run for North East Mayor after being kicked out of the Labour Party. In 2014, a North East Combined Authority with no mayor was formed. This was made up of the 7 North East councils outside the Tees Valley. Post-Brexit though, in 2018, the local authorities for Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland broke away to sign a separate mayoral devolution deal, forming the current North of Tyne Combined Mayoral Authority. This is when Jamie Driscoll became mayor. Now, the North of Tyne Authority and the North East Authority are coming together to create one North East Combined Mayoral Authority. Absolutely none of the geography for these regions makes sense. For the last 6 years, Gateshead and Newcastle-upon-Tyne, which are a 9-minute drive apart, have fallen under different combined authority jurisdictions. Jamie tells me he was one of the biggest drivers in lobbying for a new devolution deal, and other people back him up in this. Why? Money. Currently, the North of Tyne Combined Mayoral Authority has funding to the tune of about 20 million per year to drive growth. But that barely scratches the surface of all the issues the region is facing. A bigger deal over bigger geography means bigger funding for everyone. I asked Jamie about the powers he currently gets under the North of Tyne devolution deal and the limitations that devolution has brought.
The North of Tyne's actually quite underpowered compared to most of the other devolution deals. The region had tried to come together and people basically fell out and disagreed. They were all Labour councillors at the time. So we don't have control of transport, unlike a lot of mayors. What we do have is a £20 million a year investment fund, a bit more than that again for adult education, and I managed to get some money out of central government for housing, and that's pretty much it. The money that you get, you are not allowed to use for anything that's a statutory obligation of a local council. So all of those issues that need fixing, we're not allowed to spend the money on. You can be creative, you can do something that's in the same space and helps, but you can't restore local services with it. So £20 million a year doesn't even come close to the amount of money that we've lost across the public sector overall. So what you have to do is think, well, if no one's coming to help us, what are we going to do? And this is where levering in additional cash makes a difference. Or spending the cash in a way that works better for your local community with a regional wealth generation model. Does anyone think Westminster's going to come riding over the hill and rescue us? No, not in the North East they don't.
Here's an example of the do-it-yourself approach Jamie mentioned. He introduced us to Andy Haddon, the owner of Big River Bakery, a Newcastle-based social enterprise. Big River Bakery has been the recipient of one of the North of Tyne Combined Authority crowdfunders. This is an innovation of Jamie's where businesses are awarded funding if they can raise 10% of their ask from the local community first. Jamie says this means the community has a real say in the projects they want. But even people who've benefited, like Andy Haddon, are still quite sceptical about the top-down model the combined authority still seems to embody.
The model of economic development and solving problems that we've had for the last 30 plus years in the North East with European money is not the model that's going to solve the problems. For years we've had the consultants going to the west, for example, end of Newcastle, east end of Newcastle, getting them paid, doing some work, then they leave and there's nothing left behind. We've got to change that. The model has to change and we have to get place-based community solutions established that connect with the locals, bring them some hope. They see something actually happening there and it grows, it can grow. And I think we're a strong example of that. The bakery is a good embedded example. We can't move the bakery. That oven's never going anywhere in my lifetime. And that's what's important, I think, so that they see you've truly invested in the place. You're not just a talker, an academic who will come and leave, or a consultant saying, I've been one of them and I didn't like it.
What do you hear from the general public about their relationship to local politics, to whether they even know there's a mayor?
I think there's very little understanding of that there's a regional mayor coming, much more wider geographical area at the local level, and they don't have to think about that. They're worried about feeding their families and all the uncertainties that exist in their lives. We need to help address them and make them feel a sense of community, because the community it's been undermined in so many places. I think the politics has got such a bad rep over the last 20, 30 years. People disengage across all areas, and we've got to change that. Food's quite political, you know.
We decided to scope out what people across the region knew about devolution and the new combined authority. First, we bumped into local business owner Albert Harding, who initially told us he used to be a Guinness World Record holder for disco dancing. We talked about that for quite a long time, but then he got onto the subject of the neglect he feels living in the North East.
We don't get money up here. No money comes to this area here. We've got to scrimp and scrape and to get through pennies to make ends meet. It just doesn't come. Once you get the Manchester, it's finished.
You don't exist. I went to the government for help. I didn't get it. So I thought, right, screw you.
Do you know that there's going to be a new North East mayor?
Yeah, I saw something the other day about it, but up until then I can't even remember his name. Little flyer thing that came through the door.
Do you plan on voting in the mayoral elections in May?
No, because I know nothing about it.
Do you feel like you have a voice or any influence over the way politics is directed in this?
Not at all. Not at all, no.
Tell me more.
Because I know sometimes they will ask, even in workplace, they will ask questions, ask for your opinion, and at the end of the day, they will just go at the back and do whatever they wish to do. So I don't think I have opinion, to say. At the end of the day, they will do what they deem fit, like what they think that is better for them, not what other people think. Yeah.
Did you know that there's going to be a new North East mayor?
No, I didn't hear that. Is it?
Yeah.
The new project coming in Sunderland, the movie stadium, is going to be one of the biggest, largest as London. So that's good news. So we hope we get more business, because honestly, our hope is going down because we didn't have much business, recently. So that makes hope to us carry on.
What's interesting is that even though the owner of Shandy's in Sunderland hadn't heard of the North East mayor, she'd heard of some of the projects linked to this new devolution deal. The film studios she references are the Crown Works Studios. They're a new multi-million-pound development that will bring a massive film and TV studio to Sunderland. It's going to be the biggest in the North East. Most of the money behind these studios is private investment, but a final $120 million to greenlight the project was provided as part of the new North East devolution deal. Sunderland is the second major city in the new North East Combined Authority region, and it has an intense rivalry with Newcastle. It's also a city pursuing regeneration, partly via building a strong art scene. Sunderland is the home of the Stadium of Light, which recently welcomed Beyoncé's massive Renaissance World Tour, and there's lots of other arts venues around the city of varying size. This includes the fire station, which is where I've come to meet Tony Gibbon, a reporter for the Sunderland Echo. I started by asking Tony about the film studios and whether he thinks the North East deal is truly devolution or something more like decentralisation.
Recently we were given money, we were promised money for the film studios, but we don't have devolution yet, so that we got that money anyway, because it was a bit of a no-brainer for the Chancellor, regardless of devolution. He's tied it in, perhaps it's been tied in for political reasons. Oh well, if you have devolution, this is what you can have. But would we have had it anyway?
What's the awareness like in Sunderland that there's going to be a mayoral election and that there's this new North East Combined Authority?
I mean, we did a couple of stories recently where less than half of people said they would vote. I think it was 30-something% knew the date of the election. Some people are completely unaware of it. And more firsthand, you don't really hear people speaking about it in the pub or at the bus stop or whatever. It's not really an issue.
Do you think it should be an issue, or are you kind of like, what difference is it going to make?
I think only time will tell, because what will they do ultimately? They've got a big budget, but how much is it going to be used? The headline figure is 1.4 billion, I heard. But I also heard that it's over 30 years, so that brings the number down dramatically there. It's a case of what they get out of it. I think a lot of people just see more politicians think, well, we've got so many MPs anyway, we've got so many councillors, and now this. And the other thing is that it's quite a sort of a nebulous area, this here, the North East. Well, it sort of cuts off at around Peterlee, so it doesn't include Darlington or Teesside or Hartlepool. So it's not really the whole of the North East. And the other thing is that we weren't asked if we wanted to have this vote in the first place. I understand the election's going to cost £3 million.
Devolution is supposed to bring power closer to people. At least that's what the government says it promises. But can it deliver if those people are already so politically disengaged and jaded? There's another worry too. I asked Jamie whether there's a chance a cynical public will disengage even further from politics if the new devolution deal doesn't deliver.
People are going to disengage from politics already. They already have. Trust in political parties is around 12%. And actually that was from September, October last year. It'd be even lower now, post-Gaza. That's not something that any mayor can fix. And I think you'd be foolhardy to think that you're going to change the Westminster political system as a mayor. There are no legislative powers particularly that a mayor would want or need. What is required is control of the finances. So the only way we're actually going to make serious progress is to just move outside that paradigm. That's why I wanted control of the transport system, so I can start to use the powers available to bring in pension investment, and we can have it as a publicly owned system and not dependent on central government. But if you get that transport system right, that touches people. Because when you're talking about job creation, unless you've got one of those jobs, you don't know about it. And you start to bring the buses back under control, you integrate it with the metro, you make the fares free for everybody 18 and under, and you get them all on their public transport account, then that's meaningful to their lives. If you go out there and start talking about theories of government, honestly, you're not going to get much engagement, no matter how much energy you put into it. But you start affecting people's ability to get around to see their mates to get jobs, and they're using that service, that's then they'll say, actually, this is good.
Devolution is supposed to offer opportunities though. We wanted to hear from a local organisation who've been speaking with some of the candidates in the North East mayoral election to find out what they're hoping for with the new devolution deal. We met up with Nick Cook, who works at the disabled-led charity Difference North East, to get her take on whether the deal offers more of a voice to grassroots groups and the people they represent.
The North East has the highest proportion of disabled people in England. The North East consistently feels left out by decisions made by central government. We're consistently at a loss for funds, so that means we have huge cuts to services like health and social care. So we work as a membership organisation. We work with, by and for disabled people in the region, and we understand that disabled people are disproportionately impacted by those policy decisions that leave them in poverty, out of work, out of education, and feeling left behind and ignored. The three candidates we've spoken to have agreed to sign our pledges, which centre disabled people in those decision-making processes. So they've felt really productive. They felt like there's been a real open conversations about how disabled-led organisations like Difference North East and others across the region can help influence those plans and can help shape those plans going forward. But there's always this worry that listening is around the elections. So we're listening now, but will you listen to us going forward? We're the voice for disabled people in the North East. We need to make sure that you're listening to those voices that matter and not just going ahead with decisions.
We can talk till we're blue in the face about devolution, but if we get it and then it doesn't deliver, then I think potentially we have some problems.
This is Andy Walker, a long-time Labour activist. Andy lives in Durham, the home of the Miners' Gala, which is the biggest socialist gathering in the UK and a left-wing stronghold, until recently when the council changed hands. The aftershocks of the 2004 devolution referendum are still being felt here. So let's go back. 20 years ago, the hope of New Labour had turned into the Iraq War and the beginning of an anti-politics mood. Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott was championing regional assemblies as a passion project. The North East was picked as early polling suggested success and an easy majority for the yes vote. But then, the North East Says No campaign rolled into town, organised in part by a young political strategist named Dominic Cummings. North East Says No framed Prescott's regional assembly plan as elitist, muddled bureaucracy foisted on them by Westminster, one that would cost taxpayers £1 million more a week. Seeds of Cummings' later successful campaign to leave the EU were all there in North East Says No. Pledges that a no vote would ensure more money for NHS doctors and props like a giant white elephant which was floated around the North East. It worked. When voters went to the polls, they opted for a 78% no vote, just as in 2016, the same electorate voted to leave the EU by 70%. All of these votes were, in my opinion, attempts to gain more for the North East, however misguided, but that more hasn't materialised? Will devolution hold the same broken promises?
Some people call the devolution referendum in 2004 as the biggest lost opportunity that the region has ever had. There was a bit of a vote against the Labour establishment in that 2004 election. Devolution should be natural for the party of the people, really. And what we should be doing, in my opinion, is giving much more meaningful devolution to all of the regions of this country. Because if we do that, we're actually giving power back to the people. There's always been an attraction to kick the centre, to have a go at authority. But I think the interesting thing about devolution is, done properly, it actually does hand power back to people who haven't had power in the past. And I think for me, and for a lot of people, that's what devolution's got to be all about. It can't just be something that's done from the top down. It's actually got to give people not just the levers of power, but the resources to do something with those levers. And I think that's the potential, but also the threat if we don't get it right. We have to get this right.
We had a lot of references during the making of this documentary to Brexit and the shadow of Brexit that still overhangs the current political landscape, and the fact that this anti-elitist thread runs from the 2004 devolution settlement rejection to now. Does that mean the left should do what we didn't do with Brexit, learn, adapt very quickly, and develop a radical regionalism ASAP?
Yes.
This is Alex Niven, a socialist academic and the author of The North Will Rise Again. I wanted to ask him about what opportunities devolution could hold for a battered left.
Well, I think it's difficult to communicate how centralised cultural power is in this country if you aren't on the margins of it. You know, I think you were always going to have margins within margins. It's difficult to know what to do about that ultimately. You know, if you're going to kind of divide up any sort of geopolitical entity, you're going to have centres and margins. I think the key thing would just be to ensure that, you know, there are multiple centres in a country, and you know, to be aware that, you know, to be aware of those dynamics where they do exist. But also, I think, you know, the kind of opposing model, which is what we have now essentially, which, you know, is basically about, you know, even Keir Starmer has talked about devolving power to the most local level. And I think there's a real danger when you start to kind of devolve power to really you know, a really local level, that you lose this kind of civic power that you get with those kind of bigger regional entities, whether that's the northeast, the northwest, whether that's the north as a whole. You know, you would have similar issues in Scotland and Wales, where, you know, people feel differently depending on whether they live in the Shetland Isles or, you know, whether they live in Glasgow or Edinburgh. Nonetheless, I think that's, you know, to an extent, a price worth paying for, you know, a kind of, you know, what I would advocate, which is, you know, a kind of socialist regionalism ultimately, which is about, you know, a kind of decentralized polity, which, in which you have entities that are kind of, you know, about the population size of, you know, Scotland and Wales, let's say.
Why hasn't the left got a vision for regionalism?
It's a, you know, a complicated question with a long answer. I mean, you know, I think at bottom, the left is still marginalised. Had this kind of Corbynite moment, which was quite kind of short-lived and brief, actually, you know, 5 years, give or take. And a lot of the time was, you know, kind of on the back foot and in a sort of defensive mindset, and just trying to kind of fend off these kind of smear campaigns and et cetera, et cetera. You know, of course, then there's the sort of the fact that I think it probably wouldn't be too controversial to say that the left is relatively London oriented, such that, you know, I think, you know, often when it does confront issues like devolution, it's, you know, one of a number of topics that have to be sort of confronted, but it's, you know, there's still no kind of two-way traffic meaningfully, I think, between, you know, people in the regions, you know, thinking about these things and coming up with proposals, and London.
English devolution is going to continue at a rapid lick. At the moment, its terms are set mostly by a Conservative central government and enacted by regional politicians. And for all its marketing, it still feels pretty top-down and distant to those it's supposedly meant to be helping. But either way, it's happening. And there are opportunities to be found for struggling regions through devolution, and to perhaps broaden who is able to compete on the political playing field. The North East is just at the beginning of its new devolved chapter, and despite the lack of hope, there are others within the region who've said this could change things. But to see what impact English devolution can potentially have, we're going to visit the region held up as the biggest success of this devolved era so far, the King in the North's domain, Greater Manchester.